a liberal arts degree is priceless. And of course, the kind of anti-intellectual, the anti-liberal tradition of the hard right want to shut down knowledge, shut down conversation, shut down talks like mine, shut down teachers like mine. And, they therefore are shutting down the liberal arts courses in schools. They are minimising the importance of the humanities, history, geography, philosophy, etc., in favour of business, economics, robot studies, learning to tweak little machines, and then you can become a robot engineer in some military industrial espionage robotised world. Well, sorry, I'm with the human beings. I'm a liberal. Okay, so that's what that tribe is. And just to say that one of the things they've said is they want to legalise soft drugs, which they've actually done in Canada. Now, that is a liberal policy, and it would be so much better than the war on drugs, which is distressing, demonising lives. It should be an ethical choice for people. Occasionally, if you want to do that, fine. I mean, it's an interesting experience, and bless her, Jo Swinson, I think, has said, yeah, I used to enjoy cannabis when I was at university, etc. The woman is a liberal. She just needs to up her educational understanding of the social democrat tradition of her party and her tradition. But I'm sorry, I take responsibility as an educator. We should have taught these people better. It's my fault and my colleagues' fault. Okay, because we don't realise how precious this tradition is in our country. That's why we can just, let it degenerate as it's done. And the BBC trivialise it and, have illiberal voices. They've fostered this illiberal climate in my country. I don't know who on earth, I mean, poor old Churchill would be running he'd be very annoyed about this. I think he'd sack whoever was on that committee, that policy decision to implement Brexit in that way. He would find out and he would sack them immediately. One of my dear friends, Lucy Liddell's father, was called Alvar Liddell, who used to be the newsreader during World War II. He was a good friend of Churchill. Alvar Liddell was the first well-known BBC figure. He would be utterly appalled at the stupidity the BBC has become. So would Lord Reith. Okay, now we'll talk about the Socialist tribe. There's another tribe, you see, and that's the Socialist tribe under Corbyn, which we can also see, and we saw them all chanting outside the BBC headquarters, and they were saying, we love Corbyn, he's our man, get him into power, he will save the country. I know a lot of people that support the Labour Party. I have in the past voted for the Labour Party. I used to belong to the Labour Party in my days in the 1980s in London. My family were from that left tradition in Kent Town where we have a Labour MP. I understand the appeal of the Labour Party and I respect it, and I would dearly love it if I could wake up the day after the election and Corbyn has been elected with a majority as Prime Minister and is going to implement his manifesto. I've read the manifesto in detail and there are many things about it which I sincerely respect and appreciate. I think it's well written. As a peace thinker, I've looked at the peace treaty aspects, the peace elements. He says in the manifesto, I presume it's a team that have put this together, they say, Labour is committed to a comprehensive peace in the Middle East based on a two-state solution, a secure Israel alongside a secure and viable state of Palestine. There can be no military solution to this conflict, which must be settled on the basis of justice and international law. All sides must avoid taking action that would make peace harder to achieve. This means both an end to the blockade, occupation and settlements, and an end to rocket and terror attacks. Labour will continue to press for an immediate return to meaningful negotiations leading to a diplomatic resolution. A Labour government will immediately recognise the state of Palestine, etc. Now, I agree with all of that. And I think it's extremely logical and commonsensical. Unfortunately, of course, it it is one of the reasons why Labour has been demonised in the press, because you know, the accusation that Corbyn is anti-Semitic arises from the fact that he wants a two-state solution and is generous to the Palestinians, and he's been the subject of huge amounts of negative propaganda, which I find disturbing. You know, but that's the kind of world we're living in. He also says that he wants the Chagos Island people to be able to go back. He even is promising an inquiry into the Amritsar massacre, which took place way, way before any of us were alive, at the time of Gandhi's life. And unbelievably, it's never had an official British government inquiry into like why General Dwyer ordered the killing of these innocent Sikhs who were protesting for peace in Amritsar. And the general never was punished, you know, never sentenced. And he like slaughtered several hundred of them with machine guns. Well, of course there should be an inquiry, but unbelievable that it's like 100 years later. We're now 2019, and well, the Labour Party is saying that, thank you. They're also introducing a War Powers Act to ensure that no Prime Minister can bypass Parliament to commit to conventional military action. Well, I'd like to see the small print. I'd like to help write that act. Because, you know, what Theresa May's done in attacking Syria is said that, the Privy Council say it's okay. Privy Council have seen the justifying intelligence, so it's okay. So she presses the attack button and then goes to Parliament because she thinks Privy Council said okay. Well, that's why in my proposed manifesto, I've said that has to end. The Privy Council has to be brought into a state of transparency, has to be brought out of the dark shadows where intelligence can be justified because the Privy Council have seen it and none of us have seen it, and not even parliamentarians, right? No, it's got to be televised. Privy Council has to be televised like Parliament. And its proceedings have to be subject to like a Hansard record. What you say in the Privy Council is a matter of public record. And it should be subject to the Truth and Veracity Bill that I'm proposing in my manifesto for all parliamentarians and all Privy Council members. If you lie in the Lords, the Commons or the Privy Council, you're sacked immediately. No ifs and buts, no, well I had to lie for the sake of my country. No, sorry, out. If I was the monarch, or advising the monarch, I would say, you know, dear Queen, how can you tolerate people on your Privy Council or in your Parliament that are lying? No, they've got to go, because how can one ever get decent policy if you can't trust people? That's the legend of Cormac MacAir, the greatest justice king of Ireland, who had a cup that shattered when people told the truth. That's a druid teaching tale for the importance of the sacredness of truth, and we have to go back to that. I've suggested Sinn Féin should come back to the British Parliament, at least briefly, to stop Brexit, and should swear an oath, I've written it, to the heirs and descendants of Cormac MacAir, we will be true. Because actually the Queen is indirectly a descendant of those ancient Celtic monarchs of Ireland. So they can, with a good conscience, swear that oath. Other things in the Labour manifesto are brilliant. You know, I like the way they talk about education. They want to make access to higher education important, reverse the decline of part-time learning. You know, I'm someone that used to teach for the WEA and Oxford University extension courses and so on, and it's all been dumbed down, trivialised and shut down. I'm an adult education lecturer as well as a school teacher, and so thank you, Labour Party, for saying it's important. I also like that the fact that they're saying they will end the casualisation of staff. So teachers in higher education like me, we now do short-term contracts. We just do like, well, a few terms here, a few lectures here a week. Whereas, no, Labour is saying, no, let's have a proper national education service. Gosh, this is like money, you know, manna from heaven. I would love to help them write it. They're saying our national education service will be at the heart of Labour's plan for real change. We have a national health service. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had a reform Labour government get into power and do a national education service? It would be as important for our country as the National Health Service is. Isn't education at least as important as health? I would say the two are so close, you know. In the old Celtic world, the druids ran both. They were the teachers and the doctors. You could specialise. The healers went off and learned herbal medicine and surgery, and were at the time probably the most advanced healers outside of Greece in Europe. And then the others became teachers and historians and scholars. Thank you, a National Education Service. Yes, Jeremy, I'll help you write the legislation. Because the takeover of our schools, the dumbing down of our schools is just shocking. Through the control of the national curriculum, like restricting the amounts of subjects people can do. There's no sense that kids are actually born geniuses and want to seriously study and learn stuff. It's all, oh, learning's horrible, you'll only want to do the minimum, just do this little thing, learn how to do these few little things. It's like they're dumbing us down from the cradle. And again, the Liberal Democrats are brilliant on education. They're saying we want to invest in education because it is the lifeblood of our future. I mean, I have 3 daughters and, you know, they've all had good educations, but they're fortunate. One of them's doing a PhD at Cambridge as we speak, and bless her, you know, these kids deserve, all children should have this kind of quality education. One of the things in my manifesto I proposed is a gifted and talented track for universities. As a teacher, I've taught at the University of Oxford and I've taught at London University and all over the place, and I've seen in any given class of graduate students, there will always be 1 or 2 that are really, really brilliant, like the future Newton or the future Einstein. And at the moment, you're not allowed to differentiate. So you give everyone sort of bog standard. University level teaching is aimed at the sort of middle. And the guys that are on track for a first, well, you know, that's fine. But you don't actually help them. What I'm saying is in the gifted and talented track for higher education, which I'm proposing as part of my reform manifesto, we would track the future geniuses right from the time you know, the first seminar, you realise this guy seriously knows what they're talking about and has made the effort to really research all the aspects of whatever it is we're discussing. And then you would give them extra work, you would stretch them more. It doesn't mean they're in for an easy ride. No, you set them solving the equations that would be the next equivalent of, you know, cracking the Enigma codes or something. And at the moment, they're not. They're alienated. They get bored. They leave. They drop out of university, or they, you know, go and work for military intelligence and just like end up like a Snowden, or they become a hacker like Assange because you can't use their genius within the system. Now I'm saying so I'm agreeing with what Corbyn's doing, but I'm saying let's go even further. Let's have a gifted and talented track in universities, and also in my manifesto I've said we need much more of the arts and humanities in schools, and we need more philosophy and ethics. As an RE teacher, the reason I trained in that subject to teach in schools is because that is the battleground for our future. If we as a country and we as a world forget philosophy and ethics and morality and religion, what used to be called religion, meaning deep, deep, deep questions, and we just go for trivialities, just for the surface of knowledge, then we will not survive as a culture and a civilization. We will self-destruct, because it's only by attention to those fundamental questions of value and meaning that each generation gets through the crisis that it's confronted with. You know, in my parents' generation, it was World War II. How on earth they had to cope with those decisions and survive? I mean, it was because they had a moral backbone that made them realise the difference between right and wrong and good and evil. And they realised that, you know, this cause is a just cause. We've lost that. We've ended up in a world where people are miseducated in terms of ethics and spirituality. It's been privatised, so yes, you can be religious, but do it outside the campus. And it's taken that American idea, which is you privatise religious studies and nobody's allowed to mention God in the classroom or the academic campus properly. Well, that ends up where we are. That's the Steve Bannon types that are products of their higher education system, who have no moral consciousness of the difference between good and evil or truth and lies. You end up with Trump figures who are post-moral people. They don't even know the difference between truth and lies. You can see it. I don't want my country to end up like that. And I think nor does Jeremy Corbyn and nor does Joe Swinson. Boris Johnson is too late. It's hopeless. He is that post-moral kind of person. He's been through the cream of the elite relativistic schools that have taught him the only thing that matters is power, and if you lie to get there or crush people or destroy people on the way up, that's fine. This is a post-moral kind of person. And we, the British people, have to say, so the solution to Johnson isn't just to defeat him out of office and vote him out in this general election. It's to re-educate ourselves and each other and our nation in the paths of morality. You know, it's as old as the hills. I'm not saying anything new here. I'm saying what Confucius said. At the time of the warring tribes in China, Confucius went round the country saying, guys, we've got to study and learn and set up academies. We have to go back to the classics and study what is the mean, what is virtue, what is justice, what is moderation. That's why Confucius then created the Confucian system of philosophy that then endured for 2,000 years and more and gave stability to Chinese culture. And that's what is fundamentally still at the basis of Chinese civilization to this day. And it was all because he said we have to revive morality and moral discussion. And I'm saying exactly the same for Europe and Britain. So yes, thank you, Corbyn. It's brilliant. You've done superb manifesto here. However, there are some things I don't agree with, and I sadly have to now focus on this. Okay, so one thing you say quite strongly is you will not allow the Scottish people to have a second independence referendum within, the foreseeable future. And you repeated that in your little speech. I don't think you realise how far the mood in Scotland has changed. I didn't until I lived there for 7 years. I don't think that the Scottish people are going to accept that. And if you want to be popular in Scotland and in the rest of the country, I think you just have to accept that the Scots have moved on. They want out of the UK now. There's no way of keeping them in. I had this argument with my Scottish friends during the independence referendum in 2014 because I voted to keep the UK together. And I said to them, the UK is great. We can turn it into a peace-loving project. Look, I've been setting up a peace institute in London. I've got lots of friends. We did meetings in Parliament. People are good down south. Those English types, I'm partly English. We want peace. We want justice. And they looked at me like I was from some other planet, and they said, look, those English people are crooks, liars, scoundrels. We are not involved in voting for these Tories who've been running us for 36 years on and off, who've been imposing their austerity on us, who've been leading to the people of Glasgow dying from poverty, and we won't take it anymore, Thomas. Sorry. And it was an amazing political education for me, I have to say, to listen to this Scottish position, which hit me like a thunderbolt. I said, no, you're wrong. The British are really nice. We have to keep the union together. And I pleaded and I pleaded. And I voted for Remain inside the UK. And then ever since, I've kind of regretted it, because what I've watched is, it's like the Tory government since then has done everything to prove me wrong. They've lied, they've cheated, they did a very unbelievably Machiavellian cheat about the whole Brexit referendum when it came up, because initially they said to the Remain cause during the independence referendum in Scotland, they said, well, if you vote for independence, Scotland, that's it, you'll be out of the European Union. So you better vote to stay in the UK, because otherwise, if you vote to go out and become independent, we won't let you back in the EU, because we'll be able to block that. And a lot of people, that was one of the reasons I voted for staying inside the UK together, because we didn't want to end up outside the UK and outside the EU. That would have been like, what? Too much. And we swallowed that threat. Well, what happens? Unbelievably, that same lot in power in May's government then say, well, during that Brexit referendum, they say, immediately after, they then try and pull Scotland out of the EU against its will. There was no. What should have been done was a quadruple lock on each nation. So, when that referendum for the EU was set up, it should have been that all 4 countries of the UK had to all agree. That's just common sense. That's politeness. If I'm a father of a family and I have, wife, 2 kids, and we're all going to make a huge decision, shall we go to America for our holidays or Mallorca? Well, we all get an equal vote. It's only fair. Well, no, not in that kind of crazy Tory world. It's just England gets to decide. Scotland and Wales gets a bit of a voice. So, the Scots, I'm afraid, are simply, and this is my message to Labour and Corbyn, that bit of your manifesto is just out of date, I'm sorry. You had to listen to Nicola Sturgeon, and there's no way. You see, there's only 2 choices facing the UK as I see it, and nobody apart from Nicola Sturgeon is even accepting this. The future of the country is either we remain, all of us in the European Union, and then Scotland separates and becomes an independent European Union fellow member state, which would be quite an easy process of divorce, because there'd be open borders. It would not be painful. People would still be able to go and visit and work in each other's countries. Everything would stay the same in that case. There would be some disputes about, oil revenues, where the line is in the North Sea, but nothing too serious. It would be like has happened in Czech and Slovak republics, right, which was both staying in the European Union, so it was very civilized. Not a tank in sight. If the only other alternative is if England and Brexit go ahead with their crazy ideas, Scotland will then leave the Union, and it will leave the EU only to get back into the EU in as soon as it can. And that process will be long, hard, messy, and very painful. And that will end up with a hard border, on the M6 going up to Scotland. The Scots feel that strongly about it. I'm only the guy, I'm the whistleblower here. I'm I'm telling the truth as I see it. Now, of course, there are many people in Scotland who will not vote for independence, but they are no longer in the majority. That is my sense of the matter. And Corbyn is saying, well, don't worry, vote Labour and we'll give you 100 billion to spend in Scotland. That's trying to buy the Scots. It won't work, Mr. Corbyn. You have to realise that. And the Labour people that are trying to push that line, I think they need to get real. It's not going to happen. The only thing you can do, Mr. Corbyn and Labour tribe, is recognise that the Scots are off. The Scots have had a Bannockburn moment, and they will no longer tolerate being controlled by England. I want to just tell you very briefly a little aside. One of my intellectual heroes is John Toland, a druid. I've told you about him. He was a free thinker, a radical, and a friend of John Locke. And according to the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids founder, Ross Nichols, he was the first chosen chief of his order, which I'm also a member of. And so we like John Toland. He was a genius. He was a friend of Sophia Charlotte, who was the Queen of Prussia. He was a friend of her mother, Sophia, the Electress of Hanover, which is where the George I succession came in. And he knew Leibniz. He was a friend of Leibniz. He was also a friend of John Aubrey, who was the first real excavator of Stonehenge and Avebury. So this man Toland, who was Irish, was from an ancient Irish Druid family and an extremely interesting man. Now, one of his colleagues was a man called Robert Harley, who was also initially a radical and who'd been on the side of William III. He'd actually captured Worcester with a little regiment in honour of the Glorious Revolution to support the new king. Robert Harley became a very important figure in that first radical phase of the Glorious Revolution. He was a friend of Toland, and they were also involved in the first Masonic circles in Britain. Harley helped set up the Society of Antiquaries in London, and by the way, that body has the original bill or list of all Henry VIII's belongings at the time of his death, all his books, papers, manuscripts, everything is down to his clothes and whatever. Very interesting, and it's the largest archaeological library in Britain. So the Society of Antiquaries came out of that amazing time, 1707, 1710, when Harley Toland were doing a kind of intellectual revolution in British culture. But Harley became corrupt, and he was impeached. And that is a precedence for impeaching a corrupt prime minister. He was the first prime minister in British history. And he also engineered and organised the union of the two parliaments and the union with Scotland. Scotland was a union of crowns up to that point, since 1603, but it was Harley that supervised the abolition of the Scottish Parliament and the amalgamation into Westminster. And Harley was once asked, how did you do this? Like, what did you do? And I'm afraid he said, we bought the Scots. Okay. I'm sorry, at this point, Harley loses my respect. And interesting enough, he turned his back on Toland as well. He said, can't be dealing with their druids. They're too clever, get out of here. Well, Harley should be quaking in his boots. It's very interesting. What he did in 1707 is about to be undermined, undone, because you cannot buy the Scots anymore, Westminster. It's over. The Scots would rather be, free and independent and discussing their own destiny and having their own affairs. They're a fierce and proud and highly intellectual nation who are now going alone. Now, this is a serious problem for the Labour Party and the Labour tribe, and I'm trying to show you something here, my dear friends. You see, the Labour Party was founded in Scotland. It was founded by people like Keir Hardie. It was founded by those fiery Scots that said to the English, enough is enough is enough. We want social justice. Because it's in their genes, you see. It's in the Celtic gene. Going back to the Druid days, which is why, I respect these people. Because the old Druid clan chiefs and their advisors knew that we're only as strong as the poorest one among us. We can't survive if that family and their croft are dying and it's snowing and they have no food. We will go and help them. It's called solidarity. Scotland is such a fierce climate of winter, snow and rain. It's the only way to survive. So they've learned over the centuries that love is the best option, and that means to the level of your local village, right? The English, on the other hand, seem to have forgotten that, their gene. I don't know what, it's mad. So Harley was typical of that English Machiavellian Westminster politician. And it's very interesting, from being a hard, radical liberal, we'd call him a Whig, he changed and he became a Tory. He became the leader of the Tory party and the Tory government. And it was under that guise that he bought the Scots. Right? And then he was impeached. And when George I, bless him, became King of England, he refused to talk to him and he stuck him in the Tower. And Harley spent, I think, 3 years in the Tower. The king said he was evil, He'd betrayed his own Whig roots. And it's very sad. But I'm afraid, guys, this is the karma that is now coming up. You see, as Druids, we think in like 300 years is no time at all. It's just like a wink in the eye of the Lord. Just like the Old Testament prophets, Zephaniah, Obadiah, Amos, all those amazing so-called minor prophets. They think in epochs, thousands of years. Well, so do I. And this union that was bought by Harley and his cronies, Tory cronies in 1707, is coming to an end. You just have to wake up and realise that. Now, this has huge implications for the Labour Party because it was founded in Scotland. It's about to lose its roots. And it means that there has to be a whole realignment in English and Welsh politics to recalibrate, given that Scotland's off. Now, so, what the Labour Party is saying, and what Corbyn got up and said, is that, well, no, we're going to stop the Scots going. Nicola Sturgeon was asked point blank in that very interesting exchange, like, when they stop you and say you can't have your second referendum next year in 2020 like she's asked for, what will you next do? Well, I don't think they're going to go down the route of the Catalan people and do it anyway and risk Westminster sending in troops and tanks on the streets of Glasgow, which probably they would. They're not that stupid. What they will do is take it to the highest courts. They will take it to the Supreme Court. Joanna Cherry and her brilliant QC colleagues will then take it to the European courts, and it'll go up to UN level or whatever. They will eventually get the right to hold that second independence referendum, and I think it will happen in 2020. The Scots are very good at law. They kind of invented our modern British legal system. Insofar as it's got any robust respect for human rights, it was Scottish input, because their legal system is, they're very clever people. And I wouldn't take them on if I were you, the English Corbynites. It's just not going to happen. You won't win. So get over that. That's one thing I'm against. The other thing I'm against is when Labour say, with eternal duplicity, Corbyn gets up and talks to CND all the time. He pretends to be a peace guy. But in his manifesto, he's going to build 4 new nuclear submarines and keep the old nuclear weapons churning up and down the Loch Goyle where I used to live in the castle and used to watch these nuclear weapons going up and down. He's just, he doesn't want to rock the military-industrial complex too much. He wants to get the rest of his stuff through so he can't be bothered to take them on. Well, I'm afraid the SNP have outflanked you on this one, because the SNP are saying nuclear weapons will be leaving Scotland on the day they get independence. And I will be going and saying some druid prayers at Loch Goyle to bless the final parting of the submarines. You see, the era of mass weapons of nuclear destruction is over. And although Joe Swinson and Jeremy Corbyn may want to justify them and say, Corbyn's position seems to be he wants them just to patrol, but he wouldn't actually press the button, so they're just a sort of fake thing. Well, if that's all it is, well, just put cardboard things in the tubes, Joe Swinson is a bit more aggressive. She's, no, we've got to have them because everyone else has got them, Well, I'm with the SNP on this. They're saying enough is enough is enough. We don't want them. They're dangerous. Let's get rid of them altogether. And that's one of the reasons the SNP are going to win this election in Scotland, because people who have a sense of values, I've communed with the spirit of John Smith, who used to lead the Labour Party on Iona, where he's buried. People of that intellectual calibre. He was a graduate at Dunoon Grammar School, near where I lived in the castle. It's time to say goodbye to that whole nuclear weapons age. And what Britain should be doing is convening a huge process of support for the UN, which has brought in a treaty, which states can sign, to disarm. The Scots are going to facilitate this because once Scotland says no to nuclear weapons and they've got to leave Scotland, the English then have got nowhere to put them. Are they going to be in Weymouth Bay? Are they going to be building submarine things in... I don't think the Welsh are going to want them. So there's a strong anti-nuclear weapons movement in Wales, which I'm close colleagues of. So where are they going to stick them? In the Thames estuary? I don't think so. So I think at that point, and I've said all this in my Bremain manifesto, which is why it's tougher than Labour in this respect. It's much closer to SNP or Green, who are both saying no to nuclear weapons. I'm saying give the whole UK a referendum on do we want to keep our nuclear weapons. You see, I don't think it's such a shock thing. My mother was an anti-nuclear weapons campaigner for 30 years. She was on the committee of CND. And, I think it's a common sense thing, like her best friend Bruce Kent has said continuously for the last 30 years. They're immoral. We can't be a moral society and threaten to destroy and